Black smoke on the horizon heralded the approach of the Soviets. The war was slowly grinding to a halt, but the end would not come quickly enough to spare the townsfolk from the wrath of the Red Army. The streets of Schwedt were now filled with people in panic. German High Command had instructed Captain Staupe to withdraw, but the town wouldn't leave so easily. Well aware what this meant. Even if he did manage to push the Soviets back and save the town, his superiors would brand him a traitor and seek his immediate arrest. But that would have to wait for now. The defense of the town was his immediate. He would have to save worrying about it and himself later. Protect the town from the sneak. A new enemy north. Enemy force had been spotted near the lake. The relief in his men was clear to see. The building had been saved. The town was being attacked from a new direction. Captain Staupe ordered his tanks forward to meet this latest threat. Enemy reinforcements appeared in the south. More enemy units were advancing from the south. Reinforcements had arrived, just when it looked like the battle had been lost. With the enemy attacking from every direction, the situation looked dire for the defenders. Captain Stopa had realized the enemy was going to try outflanking them. Staupa had defended the town, but his defiance meant he could not side his unit again.
Ein weiterer Sieg auf unser Konto!
Over. Allies had won, but not nation of the Axis. Instead, the end of too long war victory being subdued. Stark realization of how much had been lost on sides. This had been which had made casualties of everyone. Yet there were still a few who could afford to enjoy their hard-earned spoil. Those who had seen an opportunity in the chaos that reigned around them with both hands would label it would entre. While Stopa was still a hunted man, he chose to hide in. The money he accrued afforded him a comfortable lifestyle, but his funds were starting to run dry. He was forced to look for more work, and now risked everything by searching for it. The world was about to plunge into another conflict it wasn't ready for, an era that would reward those willing to be paid. The town of Kale sat on the opposite side of the Rhine River from the Allied forces. Frank Martinez and his unit had been tasked with destroying the heavily fortified German headquarters river. The only problem was, Martinez had other ideas. Martinez had a bold plan. He was going to liberate the stolen pieces of art and repatriate the more famous ones to their rightful owners. And if he could make a tidy profit off the smith, then... Martinez and his men thundered towards the enemy headquarters, unaware that the Germans had already mobilized their own tanks, filled with their prize. There was no way Sergeant Martinez was going to let the Germans destroy this watch. Only prior to Mart was defeated the Germans' occupation. Martinez had to concentrate his search somewhere in this area. Martinez manned their search at Hector. Germans closing in fast on their position. Sergeant Martinez gave his crew to attack the S. It was too late. The art had been lost to the Germans, and with it, a significant part of European history had vanished forever.
We can't hold on.
There was no way Sergeant Martinez was going to let the Germans destroy this vast wealth of cultural treasures on his watch. The only priority that mattered to Martinez was defeating the Germans and securing the strategic location. Martinez had to concentrate his search somewhere. This area had been secured. Now, Martinez ordered his men to continue their search at the next sector.
Focus attention here.
German armor was closing in fast on their position.
Enemy. That got him. Reloaded. We pierced their armor. Ready to fire on target. That one drilled straight through. Reloading. Locked on. Focus on this location. Focus attention here.
Sergeant Martinez gave the order for his crew to attack the enemy units.
Focus on this area.
With his next destination, Martinez ordered his tanks to work.
They
no choice now. Martinez had to hunt down the escaping Germans before they could flee with the cultural treasures. Frank Martinez and his crew had liberated the treasures out of the hands of the Germans and had given them back to their... well, nearly all of them anyway.
Great job, man.
The war was over. The Allies had won, but not with the sudden and expected capitulation of the Axis. Instead, the end had dragged on far too long. The post-war victory reveille was now being subdued by the stark realization of how much had been lost on both sides. This had been a conflict which had made casualties of everyone. Yet there were still a few who could afford to enjoy their hard-earned spoils. Those who had seen an opportunity in the chaos that reigned around them and grabbed at it with both hands. Some would label it profiteering. They, however, would call it entrepreneurial. For Frank Martinez and his men, the end of the war gave them the chance to cash in on their liberated art collection. The payout had been substantial, and it gave Martinez a taste of the life he wanted. All he needed now was to be in the right place at the right time. The world was about to plunge into another conflict it wasn't ready for, an era that would reward those willing to be paid. The town of Dukla, home to a dogged pocket of German resistance. The advancing Red Army had been forced to halt and deal with this stubborn enemy. As it's exchanged blows from afar, the townsfolk found themselves being pushed steadily towards the brink of starvation. For one Soviet artillery captain, this was the final straw of a war which he had grown weary of. Unwilling to watch the population starve itself to death, Captain Anatoly Petrov had been running black market operations to and from the stricken town. It had proved a lucrative move, but one that came with enormous risks from both sides. Anatoly Petrov knew he had a fight on his hands, but now he was going up against form. If he was to escape the wrath of Stalin, he had no choice but to destroy the armored units bearing down on his position. Captain Petrov issued the orders to his comrades to mobilize. They would have to defend the town from the advancing NKVD. Enemy units were rushing towards the town. Petrov and his men were now the only thing standing in their way. X1X would play a critical role in spotting targets for Petrov's units to bombard. It was no good. Petrov signaled his artillery units to move to a new position and find a more favorable line of sight. The key to winning the day rested with Petrov being able to communicate correctly with the of his allied batteries. Petrov and his unit knew that once they opened fire, they'd be vulnerable to counter-battery fire. Petrov's men cheered with the NKVD units littering the battlefield. This glorious day for the captain to remember.
Победа!
The war was over. The Allies had won, but not with the sudden and expected capitulation of the Axis. Instead, the end had dragged on for far too long. The post-war victory reveille was now being subdued by the stark realization of how much had been lost on both sides. This had been a conflict which had made casualties of everyone. Yet there were still a few who could afford to enjoy their hard-earned spoils. Those who had seen an opportunity in the chaos that reigned around them and grabbed at it with both hands. Some would label it profiteering, call it entrepreneurial. The black market had proved too tempting for Anatoly Petrov. Even though the war had ended, he continued to ride his luck selling to those that needed it the most. It was only a matter of time before his luck would run out, but until then, he would take whatever he could. The world was about to plunge into another conflict it wasn't ready for, an era that would reward those willing to be paid.